ask you all if you're okay with that. So we're just going to go ahead and record it just so that we can have it on our website so that other people who weren't able to come to today's session are able to view it later. Okay, I'm just still letting some people into the meeting. Okay. All right. Great. Okay, so we can go ahead and get started. So again, we're going to talk about social isolation, loneliness, and COVID-19 for those of us who are just joining. So first of all, why are we talking about this? Why is this even, an important subject for us to discuss? So there's a couple of reasons why. The first is that we know over 35 million people in the U.S. live alone, whether that's by choice or because they have to. We know that that's the case. And so we have a lot of people who are already potentially at risk for feeling lonely and for being socially isolated right now during COVID-19, just by, given the circumstances they find themselves in with what they call home. So we know that there are some folks experiencing that. We also know that in a 2018 study, we know that about 20% of people in the United States reported feeling lonely, either that was often or always. And so that's a lot of people. If you think about, just any kind of given 5 people that you might see on a day-to-day basis, odds are one of them is feeling extremely lonely. And it's a pretty widespread public health issue here in the United States. And some of this data that I've pulled together for this presentation has actually come from sources in the UK. And we know that loneliness is a really big issue over there as well. A few years ago, they actually ordained a new position called a Minister of Loneliness because it's such a issue over there, especially for the elderly population. So for, anybody who's in the retirement community, it's a really big problem they're having. And we know that with some trends, the United States is usually about 10 years behind Europe. And so it wouldn't surprise me to think that, we could be continuously seeing more problems with loneliness in this country. And then we know that as of April 14th of this year, over 95% of people in the United States were under a local or state stay-at-home order. So, this is obviously due to COVID, but if we're all being forced to socially isolate from one another, that can be, a problem as well. That could be a predecessor for feeling lonely. And so a lot of us are being forced to stay away from our day-to-day lives, and a lot of that has to do with connections and community, trying to stop the spread. But with that, come risk factors for loneliness. So those are just some of the reasons why we're talking about this. I think it's important to kind of, to decipher the differences between social isolation and loneliness, because they are different things. So when we talk about social isolation, it's literally being away from your family and your friends. So you're physically separated from other people. And that's what we're all experiencing with COVID. We're telling people don't go outside, don't, interact with a lot of people if you can help it, because again, we're trying to stop the spread of COVID. But loneliness is a little bit different. So loneliness is actually somebody's perception of the quality of their relationships. So you've heard that phrase of somebody being lonely in a sea of people, right? So it's the idea that you could be physically surrounded by people, you could even be surrounded by people who call themselves your friends. But the quality of your relationships maybe aren't satisfying you, and maybe they aren't meeting the emotional need that you have for, the friendships in your community. Another way to think about it is that there's kind of a gap between your desired level of social contact with others and then the actual received level that you get from people. So again, it's the idea that the people in your community are not meeting that emotional need. And a lot of the time it can be because there's not a depth of relationship there. We know that a key part of any relationship that is meaningful and deep is vulnerability. So the idea that people know your weaknesses, the things that, you're afraid of, things like that you don't really share with a lot of people, but you have a couple people who know those things about you, and you also know those things about them. So it's a two-way street. But loneliness can arise when you feel like you don't have those people in your community that really know the real you. And so it can be even tricky, I think, especially for people who look like they kind of have it all together, for the people who are maybe, they're on Instagram and they call them Instagram influencers, or people who seem like they have a lot going for them and they're trying to keep up this facade of perfection and happiness, but really they have a lot of struggles that they feel like they can't really open up about. So that's where loneliness can arise. And it's important to kind of notice the differences between social isolation and loneliness. It's also important, though, to realize that these things can be connected. So one can cause the other, or they can both be present at the same time. So, for example, if you are feeling really lonely, if you feel like the people in your life are not meeting that emotional void that you have, then that can cause you to isolate, socially isolate, so physically isolate from other people. That can cause you to not want to go out and hang out with people and things like that, because you feel like, it's maybe not worth your energy, or you just have a pessimistic view on relationships or whatever it may be. So loneliness can cause that, but social isolation, which again, what a lot of us are in right now, social isolation can cause loneliness, and I think this can be particularly hard because maybe for some of us, COVID-19 is kind of revealing the nature of our relationships right now, and what we thought they were. And then now we're kind of seeing the reality. And what I mean by that is that potentially maybe we thought that, if we ever were in this kind of situation, we would have a certain number of people reaching out to us and checking in on us. And maybe they're not doing that, or maybe they are, but not doing it to the amount or for the depth that you would like, or that you expected. And so that can kind of induce that loneliness, because you're realizing that your relationships are not the way that you thought they were before all the COVID stuff hit. So we know that one can cause the other, or they can both appear at the same time, just depending on the season of life. And again, for this talk, we're really talking about COVID-19 and kind of the things we're experiencing right now. But obviously, we know that this can apply to any season of life that we're in. And I'm going to go over some health impacts of loneliness too in a little bit, but it's really important to note that those health effects are evidence-based for loneliness only. There's not really, at least for the information that I saw, there wasn't a lot of evidence-based health effects of social isolation, especially the kind that we're going through in COVID-19. I think because everything is just so new that they haven't done those studies yet. So it's important to note that these health effects are for loneliness only, but that, again, these two ideas are really interconnected. So I think it's important to talk about them regardless. So when we're talking about the health impacts of loneliness, there's multiple, but I just pulled out a few ones that I wanted to kind of highlight. So we know that people who report experiencing loneliness have higher rates of heart disease, anxiety, dementia, and depression. So this is underlining the idea that connection and friendship are integral to our our humanity. It's what we need in order to survive. You guys have heard of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, but the idea that the most fundamental is like food, water, shelter, and then a level 2 or above that is connection with other people. So you need friendships in order to survive. We were built that way. And then we also know that people who are experiencing loneliness, for long periods of time have shorter lives. So obviously we all have, sometimes where we feel lonely. So that's not what this is talking about. This is talking about persistent loneliness over, a long period of time. And then we also know that there are negative health impacts of loneliness. And I came across a couple different articles that talk about how loneliness can be akin to smoking 15 cigarettes every day. That's how detrimental it can be to your health. And so it is a really big deal. And then also, it's similar to physical inactivity or obesity. So, we know that, again, if you don't exercise for a day, or if you choose to not eat super healthy one day, obviously that's not going to lead you to being, physically inactive or to put you at risk for obesity. But if those things are consistent and habitual, then that can increase your risk for those things. And the same thing with loneliness. If we have 1 or 2 days where we're not really, plugged into our community, we feel lonely. Obviously, that's hard, but it's not going to affect our health over the long run. But if we have more of those days like that than not, then that's where we want to, kind of step in and intervene for ourselves. Or if we see that in our friend, we want to intervene in our friend and really try to pull them out of that rut to say, hey, you really need human connection. This is not okay to stay in this place. So just talking about, loneliness is a serious thing. It's a serious public health crisis that the UK is experiencing right now, and that I think the US will potentially experience if we kind of keep going down the trajectory that we are. And I think it's important now to kind of talk about, so what are we going to do about these things? So, again, we know that social isolation and loneliness are different. And so therefore there's different treatments for both of them. So we're not going to talk about the treatment for loneliness in today's talk, because that is, we could talk about that for a long time. So we're not going to really talk about loneliness, because with that, it's really about developing skills for us as people, developing our own skills to create, maintain, and reestablish relationships. So really really trying to figure out how do we create healthy friendships with people who are not toxic. How do we maintain those friendships over time, right? Because we know that going to coffee with somebody does not, seal the deal for a lifelong friendship. You have to keep up with pouring into that person and then pouring into you. And then also to reestablish relationships that maybe you've lost in the past. Maybe you had a best friend in college and then, you lost track of kind of how they were doing. How would you reestablish that friendship if it was really good for you? So we know that is, we could talk about that for a really long time. So today what we're going to do is really focus on social isolation, because that's what all of us are experiencing right now with COVID, regardless if you're feeling lonely or not. Social isolation is something we all, 95% of the country is experiencing. And so the way that we would go about, quote unquote, treating social isolation is to discover new and various ways to meet and interact with other people. And so, that's applicable for any season of life, whether we're in COVID-19 or not. If we're just kind of in our regular everyday lives, how would we discover and new ways to meet people if we feel like we're socially isolated? But then for COVID, obviously a lot of this is going to be translated into online. So how do we interact and meet with people who are online and do that in a way that's healthy and beneficial for us? So I think the big picture, before we kind of get into like some of the tangible ideas of how we would interact with people, is to realize that this season is not forever. So like I said a second ago, we're going to talk about how do we connect with people through technology during this COVID-19 time. But I think that we instinctually know that technology and connecting people over technology, does not compare at all to being able to interact with people face to face and the benefit that that brings us. And so just realizing that, yes, that technology brings us a lot of great things, but it's not the ideal way to build connections and to build friendships and community with others. And to know that if you feel like, okay, technology is good, but it isn't really, I don't feel like it's doing everything that I need in order to fill my emotional void. Well, that's okay, because it's not built to do that, right? So just to realize that the COVID-19 era that we're in is not going to last forever. And so just kind of remembering that one day we will get back to being able to be face to face with people and to really fill that void in the way that it was meant to be filled. So these are just some tangible next steps for us, I think, to kind of help break the social isolation that we're facing right now. Some of these might just seem really like, kind of no-brainers, but I think it's helpful to emphasize them again, and then maybe some of them are new to you. So the first is just to be consistent in calling, FaceTiming, emailing, whatever you want to do to connect with people, to connect with loved ones. Because I think that, that's kind of our key way of connecting with people, especially if some of us are experiencing the digital divide, that's what they're calling it, basically for folks who maybe don't have access to the internet or reliable access to the internet. Calling can be a really good way of keeping in touch with people. Also, just letter writing too. I think that'd be kind of fun to get back to that as well. But I think some kind of, in order to kind of break this down so it's not as ominous, is thinking about first making a list of the people who are important to you that you want to stay in touch with. So especially if you're not around your family or friends that are close to you, how are you gonna connect with them? Well, first of all, we want to make a list of who we want to keep in touch with. So maybe that's our parents or our kids or our friends. Maybe it's a cousin or something like that. Second is we want to make a commitment of when we're going to interact with them. So that could be, it's different for everybody. Maybe some people you only want to talk to once a week, and that's kind of good for you. Maybe some people you want to talk to more frequently, or maybe every day. So kind of making a commitment to yourself of, okay, I want to stay connected with these individuals for this amount of time every week. And then talking with those people to say, hey, can we figure out a schedule of when I can talk to you? I do this with my dad. Every Sunday afternoon, I talk to my dad. We've been doing this for years now. Not really related to COVID-19, but it sets up a schedule to say, hey, I care about you and I want to be involved in your life. And that's kind of what we're saying to each other. So thirdly, to be honest and open with the person that you're talking with. So we know that COVID-19 is causing a lot of stress for everybody for various reasons, whether it's because of the economy or because of the social distancing that we're all having to do, or, fear of catching the virus, whatever it is. We know that a lot of us are experiencing anxiety and stress. So how can we cultivate vulnerability between us and the people that we're staying in touch with? Well, the first way to do that is to be honest and open about the things that we're struggling with. And if we're able to be honest and open with people, then that will give them the courage to be more honest and open with us as well. So really not just, talking about the weather or something like that, but then really trying to get deep with the people that we want to stay in touch with. And then, just being able to listen as well. We don't want to be the ones talking the whole time. If we really want to keep genuine connections with other people, we have to show that, hey, we really care about you and we want to know what's going on in your life. And then I think also just kind of to wrap up this tangible step is that we want to plan ahead for future things that we want to do with our friends and our family. So thinking about post-COVID plans, what are some things that we really look forward to getting back to doing once all the social distancing regulations lift? So that can be anything that you want to do. Maybe it's going to the beach, or maybe it's going I don't know, going shopping, or whatever it is that you would be looking forward to doing. Just figuring out, hey, these are some of the things that I want to do, and being able to look forward to the future. That also helps kind of remind our mind that we will get back to normal. This is not going to be forever. So just kind of planning ahead for those future events could be really fun. And then some other things that we can do is serving others. I think that also, sometimes when we're social distancing from people, we're at home. Sometimes it can be hard to feel like you're contributing at all to society. And so I think serving others is a really good reminder that, hey, you can benefit other people. And it also kind of helps get our minds off the situation and off of how we're feeling. Sometimes our minds need a break on like focusing totally on the ways that we're kind of struggling. And so one way to do that is to try to serve other people. And so there's an awesome app that you can download. So I've linked it out here. But it's called the Nextdoor app. So if you just go to, I believe it's nextdoor.com or nextdoor.org, one of those. And it's basically, you just make an account with it, and then it can kind of plug where you are in this area or wherever you are. And then it can kind of show you the needs of your neighbors, and also can kind of just keep you updated with what's going on in your community. So that's a really great app. I would encourage you to download it. I've downloaded it, and it's helpful to kind of stay connected with my neighbors that way. To allow others to help you too, right? So this is going back to the vulnerability piece that I was talking about earlier. When we're talking with our family and our friends, being able to be vulnerable. And one way that we can do that is allowing other people to help. Maybe we can't go out to the grocery store because maybe we're, maybe our immune system is compromised, or maybe because, we have small children at home, we don't want to go to the store, or whatever the reason is. Maybe we can allow other people to help us by going grocery shopping for us or something like that. So allowing others to do the same for us is that we want to do for them. Look at your kind of your normal social schedule and consider ways of adapting it to the reality that we find ourselves in right now with COVID-19. And so, for example, if you had a regular social outing that you had with your friends, where maybe, you would hang out and go out to, grab drinks or something like that, try to adapt that to whatever, to the situation that we're in right now. So that could look like, okay, well, all the restaurants and bars are closed, but maybe right now you could go over to your friend's house, sit 6 feet apart and just talk and chat that way. So really trying to adapt the things that you really enjoy doing to the reality that we're in. Obviously, this doesn't work for every single social circumstance that we enjoyed before COVID-19, but I think a lot of them can be adapted that way. Adopting a pet is a great way to also kind of combat the social isolation that we're in, especially if we don't have other people at home, because I know we probably have a variety of people in the space today where maybe some of you are, with your spouse and your kids. Maybe some of you are just with your spouse. Maybe some of you are, with roommates, or maybe you're by yourself. But in any of those cases, I think adopting a pet is really beneficial because we know that animals are really big stress relievers and they can help with anxiety. And so, and there's a lot of, sadly, there's a lot of animals that have, run away right now from their families because of all the tornadoes and stuff that have happened in this area. So there's a lot of pets that need homes, whether that's, just something you see on the street or maybe in the, your local humane society. So just looking for ways that you can, make connections. Maybe it's not with people, but through animals as well. And then as we're talking with people, to really try to, again, enforce, really healthy relationships, we want to try to remove any kind of distractions that we may have. So as we're talking with folks, maybe it's on Zoom that we're, doing it just like this. Don't have your email up or, your phone messages up or something like that, where you're kind of distracted from the conversation that you're in, but really focus solely on the people that you're interacting with so that you can get the most out of that social interaction. And then I just wanted to note that, there's several groups right now at particular risk when it comes to social isolation that could induce loneliness. And one of those is people who are experiencing mental health issues. And, one reason for that is because, for folks who are struggling with mental health issues, it's one thing that's really important is to have routines with whatever, you're doing to be able to kind of manage that mental health concern, whether it's anxiety or depression or something like that. And so obviously with all the COVID stuff, everyone's routines are disrupted, including those who struggle with a mental health concern. And so, this group is particularly vulnerable to experiencing loneliness and anxiety. And some of the things that we've talked about. And so I just wanted to list a couple of websites and resources and support groups that are available if you are struggling with a mental health concern. I won't go into all of them right now just for time's sake, but I've listed all of them on here. And if you would like this PowerPoint, you can email me and I can send it out to you. But I've just listed a couple different support groups on here that will be really great for anyone who's struggling with a variety of mental health issues. So there's a lot of great resources out there. These are just some Clemson resources available to you as well. So I always want to list those too. So I'll give you a second in case you want to screenshot that or take a picture or write something down. But a lot of these are really great, but specifically if we're thinking about students, counseling and psychological services, CAPS is a great resource. And then, for employees, using the Deer Oaks Employee Assistance Program is also really beneficial as well. And then just kind of giving a snapshot for next week before we get to questions. So Jenny Rogers, who works for Campus Recreation here at Clemson, she's the Assistant Director of Fitness and Wellness. She's going to come and teach us about holistic health, but she's specifically going to focus on physical well-being and how we can, take care of our bodies while we're at home and working at home or learning at home. And so she's very knowledgeable, and I'm really excited to have her on the program next week. So stay in tune for that. And that was pretty much all of the material I had for you all today. So I did want to open up the floor for questions or comments.
Hey, Christy, this is Chloe.
Hey.
I think what you just talked about was excellent. And I think something that I have been trying to do a better job of is just being real with my emotions. So, for example, we all just had a holiday, we just had Easter come and go. And, whether you're religious or not, I think families get together, big meals are eaten. And that was a day that I definitely struggled just because it was completely different than what I was used to, and I wasn't around my family and friends. And so that was a hard day for me. So I talked to my friends and family about how hard of a day that was. And, they shared very similar emotions and experiences that day. And so I thought it was just really helpful for me to kind of share with people how I was feeling that day.
Awesome. Thanks, Chloe, for sharing that. Yeah, that's a really important note to think about, and something we kind of touched on last week when we're talking about grief. A lot of times grief is wrapped up in loss. So thinking about what have we lost, and thinking about the loss of normalcy right now with COVID-19. So exactly what Chloe was saying with losing, family traditions and celebrations. So that's something that's really important to acknowledge, and just realizing that you can it's okay to feel those things such as sadness, when you're experiencing that, but then to acknowledge that and to share it with your friends can be really empowering. So that's really good. Anyone else have any comments or questions? Okay. Well, thank you so much all for joining, and come back next week to learn about physical fitness while we're home and how that's beneficial to our health. And if you want a copy of the PowerPoint, just drop your email in the chat and I can send that to you. But otherwise, I hope you all have a great day, and thanks for stopping by.